Imagine this: the forest is still yet alive. A pale winter moon hangs like a silver coin above black silhouettes of trees. The air is sharp enough to sting your lungs. Snow crunches underfoot, and each exhale turns instantly to frost. You're far from any town, far from any lord's manor or castle walls. It's just you, your family, and a wooden house deep in the woods. There are no cars, no phones, no electric heaters, only what you've gathered with your own hands. In this world, survival isn't a hobby. It's the only goal. How did medieval families manage to endure winters so fierce they could erase entire villages from the map? In the next few minutes, you're going to step inside their world. The hidden shelters, the secret food stores, the rituals, the mindsets, and the survival tricks that allowed ordinary people to outlast extraordinary winters. By the end, you'll see medieval life, not as a fairy tale of knights and castles, but as one of the greatest survival stories ever lived. And you might just start wondering, if you were dropped into a medieval forest tonight, would you survive until spring? Medieval Europe, especially between the 9th and 14th centuries, experienced colder conditions than we know today. Historians call this the Little Ice Age, a time when summers were short and winters could stretch into May. Forests were vast and dense, offering timber, game, and plants. But those same forests also hid wolves, bears, bandits, and spirits from the folklore of the time. For a peasant family, living close to or even within the forest wasn't a romantic choice. It was a necessity. They couldn't buy firewood or food in bulk, so they lived where resources were. But every autumn was a race against time. Cut enough wood, store enough food, mend enough clothing. Because once the snows came, travel and trade would nearly stop. Ask yourself, how would you plan for 5 or 6 months without a grocery store? What would you store first? Grain, meat, salt, or something to keep your children warm? Shelter was the first line of defense. Medieval families often built longhouses or timber cabins dug partially into the earth to capture the natural insulation of the soil. The walls were a patchwork of timber, wattle, and daub, mud, straw, clay, and animal dung pressed together, then whitewashed with lime. Roofs were steep and thatched so snow could slide off. A single door faced south to catch the winter sun, and the windows were tiny or covered in animal bladder to keep out the wind. Inside, space was communal. There was no kids' bedroom or living room. It was one large chamber where life, sleep, and cooking all took place. In some households, even the family goat or a pig might sleep inside at night, their body heat contributing to the warmth of the humans. Think about that. Would you be willing to sleep next to a goat just to survive the night? They were. At the center of this room burned the hearth. The hearth wasn't just for cooking. It was a life support system. It dried soaked clothes. It smoked meat. It kept frost from creeping into bedding. And it gave a flickering sense of security. Families became expert at banking their fire, covering embers with ash to preserve them overnight. Because striking a new spark from flint and steel took time and precious tinder. Imagine going to bed knowing if the fire went out, relighting it might take an hour in the freezing dawn. Would you sleep soundly or wake up every few hours to check the coals? Clothing formed the second shield. Layers of rough, spun wool, linen undergarments, and animal furs on top created a primitive but effective insulation system. Cloaks were heavy, often hooded to protect from wind and snow. Children wore miniature versions of adult clothes. Gloves were rare, but hands were protected with mittens or simply tucked inside cloaks. Boots were stuffed with straw or moss to trap warmth. Even the dye of the cloth mattered. Darker colors absorbed what little sunlight existed. Every garment was repaired again and again. In a world where exposure could kill faster than hunger, a needle and thread were as important as a sword. Can you picture sewing by candlelight while wind howled outside, knowing each stitch might be the difference between frostbite and survival? Food preparation began months before. Families planted root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and parsnips specifically because they stored well. Apples, pears, and plums were dried. Beans and lentils were stockpiled in clay jars. Grain was threshed and milled into coarse flour, which when mixed with water became dense breads or porridge that could sustain life even when meat was scarce. Meat, when available, was salted, smoked, or buried in cool cellars. Honey and beeswax played a dual role. sweetening food and preserving it. In some areas, people buried barrels of fermented cabbage or turnip tops that acted as a medieval version of vitamin C to ward off scurvy. Ask yourself, could you plan a pantry that would feed your family for 6 months without refrigeration? What would you ferment? What would you smoke? Foraging and hunting didn't stop with the first snowfall. Men laid traps for hares, squirrels, and birds, often checking them at dawn. Women and children searched for nuts hidden by animals or dug through snow to pull up edible roots. Berries and mushrooms found in summer were dried and stored for winter soups. In coastal areas, families collected shellfish during low tides even in icy conditions. Every mouthful mattered. A single rabbit might be stretched into stew for days. Nothing went to waste. Bones became broth. Fat was rendered into tallow for candles or cooking. Even pine needles were boiled for a vitamin-rich tea. Would you recognize an edible plant under a foot of snow? Could you risk a wrong guess when poison could be as deadly as hunger? Firewood was the real currency of winter. Families spent late summer and autumn cutting, splitting and stacking wood in enormous piles. Ash, oak, and beech burned long and hot. Twigs and brush became kindling. Children were sent daily to collect fallen branches, a task as important as milking a cow. Without enough wood, no amount of stored food or warm clothing could save you. People developed tricks, stacking wood so it dried faster, or burying logs under snow to keep them from freezing solid. Picture your own yard. How many cords of wood would you need to last 5 months? Could you even cut it all by hand? Community ties were another invisible layer of protection. Medieval life in forests might seem isolated, but families were rarely truly alone. They formed networks of trade and mutual aid. One household might have a surplus of smoked fish, another of grain, another of herbs. They exchanged labor mending roofs, sharing a plow, caring for children during sickness. In emergencies, neighbors became lifelines. If your own home burned or collapsed, you moved in with kin or a friendly family until spring. In return, you worked their fields or tended their animals. Could our modern neighborhoods pull together like that? Would your neighbors bring firewood at 2 a.m.? In the medieval forest, they often did. Alongside material survival, there was spiritual and cultural survival. People believed certain prayers, charms, or rituals protected them from wolves or evil spirits. But these were also psychological tools. Ways to feel a sense of control in a world of chaos. Children were told stories not just for entertainment, but to encode lessons: which plants to eat, how to behave in a snowstorm, why sharing food mattered. Storytelling, song, and craft helped ward off despair. Imagine months of darkness, only the flicker of a tallow candle, and your grandmother telling a tale about a hunter lost in the snow who found his way home. Wouldn't that story stick in your mind, ready to guide you if you were ever lost? Yet even with preparation, disaster could strike. Roofs caved under heavy snow, food spoiled, illness swept through cramped quarters.